So welcome everyone to this new edition of Welcome Change, this wonderful series of webinars that Ashoka is hosting to lead conversations with Ashoka Fellows and to explore different aspects of their work. And I'm with Simon Köhl today. He is an Ashoka Fellow since 2018 and has built an incredible organization, Serlo, that he will talk about. And but I want to start by telling you all, I've known Simon for some time, but I really dug deeper into his work and the meaning of his work when I was writing some articles about the impact of technology and technology funders and the technology playbook on first my own organization, CityMart, and then also looking around me as to how these dynamics were playing out. And what I experienced personally and what others have experienced is when you are not a technologist yourself and you're beginning to go down a pathway of building technology, there are a lot of dynamics around how you raise funding for technology and what kind of expectations come with that. That's kind of what I call the you're all in or nothing model. You either become a completely tech organization or you don't. But also then the expectation of how you grow and how you dominate a field, how you own a market, and so forth. And about a year ago, my colleague Judith Costa forwarded me an article about an education technology startup in Europe that had raised a lot of funding, hundreds of millions of euros. And we were kind of working through what does it really mean that this company is entering the German public school system with a commercial model, and how ultimately their products were designed to almost defund the public school system and pull parents' attention to after-school tutoring, and really offered very little to make schools more valuable. And they were playing this kind of uncomfortable competitive streak of parents that as long as my child knows more than others, we're doing okay. It wasn't about how much we learn, it wasn't about where we learn, it was really about just staying a step ahead. And they had this business model where people would pay to stay ahead of one another that I found very disturbing. And then I looked at Serlo and I was like, wait, there's this amazing person I know, and what is going on there? And Serlo is, and Simon, I'm sure can describe it much better, but it's like a Wikipedia for schools. The content is created by 100 active authors, I believe, mainly around math, and they have 1 million users a month. Serlo is also organized and owned as an association, and really better understood as like a workers' co-op, I would say, which means it has a very different set of incentives and dynamics that are at play when the product is developed and how it's kind of entering and acting in the market. And then there's this really exciting set of news that hopefully, as Simon, you can also talk about, that Serlo is becoming part of the national digital infrastructure for schools. So you're becoming a kind of official part of the education system. So this is all the reasons why I love Simon and why I love what Serlo is doing. And Simon, maybe just to jump into this, correct anything I've said wrong, but also tell us a little bit about where you are now and maybe briefly how you started Serlo and how this idea has been involved.
Right, yeah. Hi, everyone. Sascha, thank you very much for inviting me and for the introduction. Yeah, I mean, so I personally had a terrible time at school, even though I am very privileged from the economic background of my parents. And this experience in school and also like a basic understanding of how the access to education defines so much about the possibilities you have later in life, inspired a group of other students and me to build a website that was and is inspired by Wikipedia to make access to high quality educational resources as easy and independent from economic backgrounds as possible. And so we built this platform that offers explanations, exercises, step-by-step solutions, learning videos, and a lot of other content, completely free of charge. We can do this because of the volunteer authors you already mentioned, who contribute the majority of work. So we can focus on really building a good product technology-wise. But still, and I think this is something a lot of other fellows maybe and NGOs can relate to if you work directly with a target group. It's mostly the situation that there's a system in place like the school system, and it produces a lot of inequality. So many young humans go at home after school and they kind of are lost because the system isn't able to provide the individual support they really need to really evolve with their possibilities and with what they want to do in life. And that was why we, addressing the news you mentioned, that was why we went to the Federal Ministry of Education in Germany. And it was a window of opportunity because during the COVID crisis, a lot of the digital public school infrastructure failed. And we kind of said, hey, we have this bunch of high quality free resources, and are you interested in implementing them into the official state learning management environments via a kind of technical interface, so that if teachers are searching for new resources to prepare their lessons, they can find our resources. And then in a second step, we offer also our content editor so that they can, as intuitively and easy as possible, adapt our content to the individual needs of their classes, or ideally even individual students, and wherever they are at their learning journey and their methods which fits them. And after a year of negotiations, they kind of agreed to this proposal and also provided us with a lot of funding to implement this, which doesn't mean at all that we are going to succeed with that. It's like a huge bet. But after over 10 years of very groundwork, a lot of volunteering during our time as students, and then parallel to our being a student at university, now we have at least the opportunity to really implement this idea of collaborative creation of content and making content accessible, not in the afternoon, curing the symptoms that the system creates, but really help transform how learning in schools works, and that there's more individual support and more collaboration.
This is, so first of all, congratulations. This is such a big step, especially considering that you started this as a high school student with your friends, and it's evolved now into what may become an important part of the national education infrastructure. And just to put this into context, when I was investigating the story I was writing, I looked at the company I mentioned earlier, that startup. They had raised 300 million euros. And at the time, Serlo's annual budget was 300,000 euros to serve 1 million students a year. The idea that you could run for 1,000 years with that kind of funding, and what actually that funding signals, right, is almost, I don't know, I read it as almost you were challenging the big fish in a way, and the big fish was setting itself up to challenge you. And I wonder if you can explain a little bit how that relationship works between, let's call it, public education technology, and maybe the role you play as a non-profit association providing education, and the pressure that is coming from privatization and the kind of speculative gamble for education technology dominance, I would say.
Yeah, and I think we have to be really frank with ourselves about the levels we are playing on. And even though there are organizations like Khan Academy in the US, like Wikipedia, like maybe we much smaller, but nevertheless who are able to kind of get significant shares of the market and organize this in a non-profit, impact-orientated, independent way. The huge shift is going towards privatization of the school realm. And even though that might bring a lot of innovation, and also most of the people who are working there, they have good intentions. They want to help education and improve education. And I think that's true, or is a true motivation. Nevertheless, I think we have to be, really, don't fool ourselves that all this venture capital going into there is creating at the end a lot of pressure to be paid back and with a multiple. And that means, even though some of these startups might create services that are really broadly accessible and not that expensive, and maybe some of them even can make like treaties with the state to provide the service to all the students. All of that is very good if it happens, but there's always going to be this question: is there any additional value we can create to sell it to people who are more wealthy? And so they will, at the end, they are going to drive apart the students depending on what kind of economical class their parents come from, sadly. Yeah. And they are not really interested in a very well-funded, innovative public school system because it takes away their market. Yeah. And we are not playing in this league at all. And we're really asking ourselves, how can we compete? It's not going to be by creating the same amount of funding at all. That can't be the way. So how we to be hopeful and positive, what the way we think, or the direction we think towards is, if there are a lot of players like us who are independent and impact orientated, how can we, as through collaboration, helping each other and having a self-understanding of being not just part of a small organization, but part of a movement that is working towards the same impact goals. And that's my first priority, not my employer, not just my team, but really the whole global family trying to solve this problem. I think that this can create a lot of power and competitiveness also towards this private sector, against this private sector.
Yeah, and I wonder now that you say this, that the fact that the education system is quite slow moving, whether that might work to your advantage there, that that you do not need to kind of have a revolutionary new product every month, but you can also focus on building the relationships. And I think what you described about how your new infrastructure that you're going to experiment with is going to bring teachers into becoming content users and content editors is kind of a way of also involving the people already employed and engaged in the school system to create something new.
Yeah.
There's another really outstanding feature about what you do, which is that you started so young. And we talked about this in our preparation conversation. I asked you, does that matter? And I would love you to share a little bit about what your reply to that was, how you've experienced starting young and what that meant, but also looking back, what that's made possible.
Yeah, so I think to our advantage, we really didn't know anything about incubators or Ashoka or what entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship meant. And that led to being under the radar for like 3 to 5 years. So there was nobody telling us that we are not experienced enough, too young, don't have the capital or the network to pull this up, building such a huge learning platform and reaching that many people. And I think that was luck. But it also tells us maybe a little bit about what young humans who have ideas and visions, what they really need. And that may be a lot more in the direction of, okay, I support you. Whatever your idea, your vision is, and all the judgment I might have about, is this realistic? Is this a good idea or not? Just let it be for the moment, and have this young being make their own experiences. And might be successful, might be not, which is learning in its purest form, also to fail with endeavors. Yeah, and I also have to remind myself about it very often, because of course we get asked if we can like support or give feedback to ideas, and not going in this mood of now I'm an adult and I know how things work and what's realistic and what not. That's not important if children or young adults like build ambitions to change things for the better.
I think that's such an interesting way of framing it. Just last week, I heard listened to this podcast about an author who wants to shut down all 13,000 business schools in the world. And the reason why I'm thinking about it is because, of course, all this incubation and startup support infrastructure is really an extension of business schools, right? It's basically very targeted playbooks. And the reason why he said we should shut them all down is that ultimately our current mode of capitalism, or technology capitalism, or surveillance capitalism, these are ideologies. They're not science. You know, there are different ways of organizing things, but we're almost, what you were explaining, it's almost when you get in touch with that support ecosystem, it only wants you to do one thing. And I think what you were describing is how, as a young person, you were free, first of all, of those preconceptions. I'm sure you didn't think of a business model or revenue streams. And so you, in a way, you built the system as you imagine the world to work, which turns out to be really, really amazing. But I think there's another part, again, like you said, this very uncomfortable dynamic between mentoring young people or supporting young people. This notion that if they do a school project, they can do whatever, but if they think of doing something outside school, we're almost confronting them with all the loaded expectations of the adult world. We have a question from a user who's not named, which is, what is wrong with how children are taught in schools, and what is different about Serlo and how Serlo delivers the learning experience?
I would say there are a lot of things that don't work well. One, I think I mentioned already, is that even in Germany, and especially in Germany regarding the OECD states, that success in school and the possibilities you have through that later on in life is so much depending on how rich the environment of the school is, how rich your parents are, if they can add additional private tutoring and so on. Regarding like the teaching, I would now say that like the biggest problem is this idea of adults decide what young people have to learn and how. And at least in Germany, that school is very much organized, structured, defined by adults. And we teach young children to kind of get in this passive consumption state of mind in schools. And that doesn't match at all the dynamic way how people have to, in a creative and entrepreneurial way, how we need people to react to increasingly fast-moving world, increasingly difficult problems we have to solve, mentioning the climate crisis just as one. So giving students much more responsibility and freedom to decide for themselves what they want to learn, how they want to learn, how they interact, and changing the role of teachers away from teaching to coaching, space holding, creating learning opportunities and environments I would say is one of the biggest, or maybe the biggest shift I at least want to see.
And what does that look like in the classroom? So does Serlo play a role in the classroom, or where does it appear in the, let's say, in the experience of learning and teaching maths? And how do students find you, and what do teachers say about this?
Yeah, that was the second part of the question. I forgot. Thank you. So for this change, there are so many variables that variables, so that we need different organizations and movements tackle them independently. This is like how teacher training, it's like the whole state regulation around curricula, parents, school architecture, and then one piece of the puzzle is the learning resources. And there we think our role, or the focused role we try to take, is providing learning resources that are very flexible in the way how you want to learn, where you can move freely through the platform. It doesn't guide you and say, okay, this is the effective way to become level X in math. We give a lot of decisions to the students if they want to like more theory, if they want to read or watch a video, if they want to practice, what kind of practices, and kind of let themselves decide the way through the content, what they are interested in, and even support switching between subjects. So if a math exercise is based on a like physics problem, we link, like in Wikipedia, offer a lot of links in this case to the physics world, and maybe that attracts them more, and then that's positive.
And so Eva is asking a question about what is different about Serlo and Khan Academy, for example. I think Khan Academy, as many of our viewers will be familiar what that looks like.
So one difference might be this aspect I just talked about. Khan Academy is very good in guiding through content very effectively. We have another philosophy there, but actually, from my perspective, that's not important at all. We would see Khan Academy as a collective impact partner. And there, the logic to the like private sector switches completely, because in the private sector, if somebody's doing like kind of the same you are trying to do, they're the closest competitors. But if you work not towards profit, but behind that a impact goal, those who do the same like you, they're your closest partners and most important allies. And that's how we view Khan Academy. So we also promote them. And with learning content, I think it's like with news media or online news, that it's not a good idea to just have this one single provider everybody's using. I think from a perspective of didactical ideas, but also like worldviews that are always implemented, especially in subjects like economy or social sciences, it's good to have a variety of offers.
I think I read somewhere that part of your vision is that teachers, almost together with students, create the right way of learning, and that you're providing some resources to that. Is that kind of how teachers would experience it, that they see, okay, students can now find their own way through the content, but I can support them and I can adapt the learning approach to the people I actually have in the classroom? Is that how they use it and how they see the value in this? Yeah,
ideally. Like in the broader usage, it's much more small things are changing, so that at the moment teachers are this one authority and also source of truth kind of in the classroom. And to just adding one Serlo laptop and allowing everybody all the time to just get up from their place and look things up themselves, instead of asking the teacher. This actually sounds like a small step, but there's a lot happening in accepting the second authority and the this maybe different way how things are taught on our platform than how the teacher did it. But also this like state of mind of the students, not being dependent and waiting until they can ask their question, but just taking on responsibility for the learning themselves, getting up, looking something up for themselves, and that can also be very, on another way, like very empowering. And yeah, that's how like a first step of implementing Serlo in a classroom might look like. And then at the end, the way how we envision school, classroom isn't important anymore. School is a huge learning like environment where students can mostly at least move through freely, organize their learning on their own, and getting a lot of support and inspirations from adults around.
So we have some more questions coming in, and one question from Niels Hansa is that if monetization and privatization are putting negative pressure on innovation in education, and if the public school system is resistant or slow to change, how do you scale? What is your pathway to scaling your solution as an NGO? And maybe related to that, another question from the Ashoka team around, you know, how did it come about that the national education system is looking at you, is considering you? And I guess those two things are related, because the national education system is giving you scale. But then the other part, I guess, is also the question about how do you manage the relationship between scaling and the organizational sustainability of Serlo?
Yeah. So for the moment, we have the classical instruments to scale. You might already know foundations, now also state funding and private donations. I think we have a huge potential in private donations if we can kind of copy how Wikipedia is doing that. But looking forward, that's not a strategy yet, more like a personal field of interest. I think what's very interesting is this idea of pay as much as you want, which is kind of in the middle between free and pay to use, which also, of course, needs a kind of involved society which sees the value in such offerings and take on responsibility to maintain and grow these helpful offerings. And even though they could just say, I don't want to pay anything, that they decide to do so. But there are like societal bubbles where that works already quite well, for example, in concerts. So I think that this is interesting. But then the most important shift, and we also try to help with this in Germany a little bit, is that we create forms of organizations that really stay independent. And we believe that the aspect of ownership is at the end the most important aspect or the most important aspect to ensure long-term mission orientation. And so there's work to do to grow this economy of steward-owned, purpose-owned, and purpose companies. Maybe you heard the case of Patagonia, who just switched. They just switched to this model, and we try to lobby for this in Germany a lot, together with a huge group of other startups and NGOs. And then from the other side, funders, family offices, foundations, and also venture capital, like they have to move to see the potential in these steward-owned, purpose-owned companies and give them money, although they don't have any voting rights, and they can't expect the same return of investment they are used to in the just commercial-orientated startups. And if this comes together, I see potential to kind of create a new type of economy, and also get away from this. I grew up with this idea of, okay, we have like public and the public sector and the nonprofit sector on the one side, and then there's the private sector on the other side, and it's like that's how the world works. And if you want to move things to the better, you just have to support this. And these steward-owned companies who use the innovation drive of that business model can create and that startups can create on the one hand, but on the other hand, really ensure a long-term non-profit orientation and impact orientation. Bringing this together, I think there's a huge potential.
I think this is so interesting because we've gone through over the last decades, we've gone through different stages of this. You know, we've gone through also a phase where people were obsessing about whether software is developed open source or not. And it almost seemed like that was a defining factor. And I think, I'm not an expert, but I think when Google started to develop operating systems, and even though they were open source, they were really just expanding the monopoly, we realized that that wasn't enough. You know, it wasn't really a matter of how you license the code. It was also a matter of how you practice the business, whether your goal is to dominate or whether your goal is to share and collaborate. Of course, in technology and in our ecosystem, venture capitalists are important for 2 or 3 reasons, and that's my personal experience. One is that anyone who wants to build technology thinks immediately, I need to find venture capital. So I think that's one thing. We associate technology with venture capital. It's almost like we cannot imagine anything else. The other is that when we look at social entrepreneurship and the work of many Ashoka Fellows, if you want to raise, if you want someone to place a big bet on what you're doing, to really believe in you and to take more risk than others, it's usually technology entrepreneurs who are willing to go that journey with you. And that's certainly been my experience. And it's been wonderful because they get the idea of trying something big and taking a risk with you, whereas many other funders are kind of very incremental and very restrictive and so forth. So, but then what these guys bring with them is not just the kind of risk-friendly capital, but the mindset that the way they build their business, their technology business, is the way you are going to succeed in your social impact organization. And that's the kind of bit that I found hardest to negotiate. And I think we've made a lot of progress on that, but hardest to negotiate to say the playbook of building a quick startup that dominates the market fast is very different from changing the culture of the classroom, which is what you're talking about. So I guess somewhere inside there's a question that I have is like, Anne, she posed this question, do you think there's a role for venture capitalists, and do you have experiences, positive experiences with the venture capitalist ecosystem? And I would expand that beyond the tech funding but also the people who are now thinking about their philanthropy and who come from that background. What is your experience there?
I mean, venture capital at the end just means high risk of loss. And if I want to sustain this venture capital business, there has also to be some with high return. And that's inherent logic, I would say, at the beginning, and not something bad or inherently. And that's how risky it is to build technology, independent from if you build it to do e-commerce or to change the educational system. So I think we need them. But now we are at the point where, okay, then doing this in a good way means to have like a B Corp certification, a strategy, founders or employees who are motivated to do good things, or being open source and transparent, and a mixture of all these and other aspects. But they are temporary. And these things can change if the actual owners of this company want them to change, or if the company is taken over by von den Erben. You have to help me out with the vocabulary here. The children.
Yeah, the people who inherit. Yeah.
Or the management changes, like the economical pressure changes. All this can change, and that's why we think ownership is so important. it kind of guarantees all these good intentions, good strategies, transparency, open source, and so on, to be true also in 10 years when this company might be very big, a much more diverse ownership structure, and the first venture capitalists want to have their money back. So, and we lost so many of these well-intended startups and organizations through this process.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up in the next 4 or 5 minutes. I have a question here from Nico de Klerk, who's also building a nonprofit in South Africa in education, and he's asking if Simon or any of your colleagues would be willing to be connected individually, also in coaching them and helping them, sharing experiences, and their work is aimed at education in Africa. Is there a way that people from around the world can connect to you and to Zerlo?
Yeah, there is, and we are very happy to be connected and learn from each other. In both directions would be nice. Regarding internationalization, we're very careful regarding our focus and so on. But nevertheless, I think we can and should learn from each other within the Ashoka family and all the others who work towards the same mission.
Wonderful. One other thing that came to my mind when you were describing this is that at least when we decided in our organization to really go all in for technology, everyone told us technology is unbelievably expensive, so you need a lot of capital for it. And yet Zerlo seems to be incredibly low cost. By comparison, you're reaching 1 million students a month, and yet you have a very low cost structure. You have a comparably small team. Can you tell us about how should other people think about this? Is it a myth that technology has to be incredibly expensive, or is there a smart way of going about it that allows you to kind of balance the reward of technology, but also kind of maintain that kind of autonomy that managing costs efficiently gives you?
I can only talk about web technology, and nearly every time you underestimate how costly it is, and we had to mingle through this, even though we pay well within the social sector quite well, our developers, they earn like a third what they can earn on the market. So, and this is just an example for this huge imbalance of these worlds. We have to rely so much on people being willing to earn a lot less, of partners, other companies to offer us pro bono work, to support us, and be just very efficient and very precise in what we do. So that's the part that makes it difficult. The part that I think where we have an advantage is that especially the very smart people, they know, okay, what's really relevant for me and especially my kids in the future is the development of society and the planetary health. And so by being smart also at the end, in my opinion at least, means to have this ambition grown inside to have a positive impact with my work. And so I think we have a huge advantage on as an employer brand, as an employer brand at the end. And we're very lucky to motivate people to work with us. Not because we can pay so much money, but we can offer co-ownership, entrepreneurial experience in our team, but also of course working towards a cause that is and the purpose that is important to them and their families.
what a wonderful way to close, to remind ourselves why even technologists get excited about doing this work, because they are part of the future, and they're creating the future here that their children might want to benefit. I want to thank you, Simon, and I want to say also to everyone, the website serlo.org has incredible resources. Serlo is super transparent about governance, about finances, about how decisions are taken, about what they're doing, what the product is. So please look it up. I think with some Google Translate, you can navigate even the nerdy German stuff. Simon, it's been such a pleasure, and thank you for taking the time to sharing with us today.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Wonderful, thank you everyone.